Welcome back to the Crochet Karate. So it's my friends at yarnspirations.com. Today we're going to do table knitting. So Lauren on the TV show called The Circle is working on a table knit blanket. She happens to be on the floor because it's a reality show and the whole apartment is used for a reality series. It's a safe place for her to be able to do it. So you don't need to use a floor like she's using. You can use a table if you have a dedicated table. So what you have here is that this is Bernat Blanket Extra yarn, so it's thick. You only need 4 balls, so you need 3 balls of dark gray for this and only 1 ball of the orchid, and you can see how far 1 ball would go on this thing, so it's only 4 balls. This goes into craft because we're going to use our fingers instead of knitting needles or crochet hooks. So you can use it if you want to, but in this case we're going to use our fingers. So it is considered a beginner level. You're also going to need a spare piece of yarn that matches the color of the Bernat Blanket Extra, so very close to it, and also a tapestry needle. I'm going to show you a tip on being able to change the yarn so that you end up being able to weave in your ends. If you try to weave it in and not use what I'm about to show you with that later on in the tutorial, then what's going to happen is that it's going to fall out on you. So that will be an extra tip here. If you're new to knitting, you're going to notice is that the edges of this blanket look a little different than the rest of it. And the reason for it is that they have this going on the side so that the blanket prevents it from curling up. So if you use knitting straight across, the ends of the blankets tend to fold in. So what they do is they alternate between knitting and purling on the edges to create the look. So as we start this, we're going to get this to look very similar to that, so it looks like it's all balanced. And so that's something that you're going to have to keep an eye on, but we'll take you through step by step as well. This yarn is really thick and it's a big ball, so I just had to zoom out the camera to show you what it looks like. So this is Bernat Blanket Extra, and you can see that it's really quite nice. So you're going to want to work with the outside of the ball, so just slide off the label and just start taking some pieces out of the side, so meaning just unwrap it a bit so we can do that safely. And so the less tension you have, so just take the yarn that you have and just kind of just pull it a whack of it. In my slang, it just means a lot, and just pull it a whack so that it's not going to be something that you're fighting from the ball. Okay, and then you'll do that throughout the whole project. So whatever is your dominant hand is the one you're going to be working with. And so you will start, if you are looking at this, there's 2 versions, there's right and left. So use the version that matches what you want. You'll see that in the video description for left and right videos. So you're going to use your finger here and you're going to make what is called as a slip knot. If you already know how to do one, just do it the way that you feel comfortable with, but make sure you leave enough yarn so that you can hide this in. But because the thickness of this yarn is so thick, is that you don't want to waste a lot of it. So don't just do something like this and have all this waste because you'll be cutting it out. So just about that much. So use your finger and point and just take the ball and pull up and go around your finger twice. Like that. Okay, so with the yarn in front of your hand, wrap around twice. One more time. Point. It's in front of your hand and down. Now, I want you to use the other 3 fingers that you have and just kind of close it in like this. Okay, so just close. I call it leapfrog, and what we want to do is play the game of leapfrog to create the slip knot. In order to do that, we're going to have the back frog jump over the first frog here, but we don't want to jump over our finger. So I'll show this to you 3 times. So here's the first time. So we're going to go over top of your finger. So it jumped over. And now this frog is in behind and it's so excited when it jumps, it's going to jump over this guy, but also jump over your finger. And that is your slip knot. That's your starting knot that you'll play with. So we'll show it again. The game of leapfrog. Back over the front. This frog is so excited, it jumps up, jumps right over, and right over top of the finger. And that's your slip knot. Last time. And we have other videos here on the channel if you need it. for stuff like this. So wrap twice in the game of leapfrog. And you can do this with any size yarn too. Okay, that is your slip knot. So if you need to put me on pause just to catch up, please do that. And we're gonna move on and start the first foundation row. We're now going to create the foundation chain that is consisting of 30 loops. This first slip knot is not counted as one because it'll tighten up and completely disappear. You have to get the loop big enough that you can use your fingers to either pinch through and pull, or use your other hand and feed it through. So just feed it through and make the distance look the same. So we have 1, and you need 30 of these. So pulling it from behind, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I need you to go all the way to 30. Try to make it look like the change. This is actually my 6th attempt to make this look consistent, because once you get used to this, you'll have consistency like this. So if you don't get it on the first run through, just know, you know, this was take number 6. So I need you to get all the way to 30. I'm gonna do a few more off camera, and when you get all the way to 30, just stop and continue to play the video at that point. The first row, you're gonna have it just like this. Leave it flat, the nice smooth sides facing up. Okay, so you'll look at the difference. And the first loop that you have is considered the first loop of row number 1. So we're going to ignore that, and we need to go to the second loop here. Okay, see how it's coming out of this loop? This is your second. But because we're gonna purl, we need this yarn to be on the front side of the work. So just lift up your chain and bring the yarn to the front of the work, like this. And so whenever you purl, you have to have this yarn in the front. So this is the live loop coming out of this here. So you want to make sure it's consistent, so just pull it a little bit tighter. Okay, they say it's about a 2-inch long loop. And you want to go to the next next one right here. And you're just going to take this yarn, and you were just going to push it through to the back and make it look like this. Okay, you're going to pull through like this. You're then going to go to your next one, so you'll see it. It's all in the same positioning. So just take this yarn and go through the next loop and push it back. So when you pull on this, you want to pull from the yarn, primarily from the yarn ball, to make the loops live. And we saw Lauren doing this on the floor. So here's the next one here. So your tension really does matter. So you just have to play with it, and it will actually balance itself out. Use your finger. You can push it through if it's a little tighter, but make sure that you do not change the height here. And you're going to work all the way across. And so you should be able to count 30 live loops. These are considered live because if you pull anything out, it'll come out on you, and you go right to the end. Okay, so we go right to the end. We're never going to turn the project upside down. We're always just going to leave it sitting flat on the table. So maybe you want to move your chair, maybe a rolling chair, just work your way back and forth. And this would be row number 1 then. And any loops that look kind of weird, just make sure that you just kind of pull up on them. And if there's any extra slack, you can pull from one loop to the other, and it will change the process. So now we're going to move on to row number 2. Now in row number 2, we're going to knit. Okay, so we purled because the yarn was in front. This time we want to make sure that the yarn comes from behind. So starting on the edge right over here is that you're going to take this yarn and you were going to pull it through the back of this loop. So we had been going in, now we're going to come out through the back. And you start in your first one, and you pull up your loop and make it the same distance as what you've been playing with. So you may want to, it's easier if you have the yarn coming from the other opposite direction, so you can just kind of pull into the project up. Okay, so just grabbing your next loop and just pushing it through the back and making it the same distance from what you're used to. Okay, we'll just pull up on it and keep going like that all the way across. So you're knitting yourself across. So I'll go right into your last one from behind. And that was row number 2. And just kind of go through your project to make sure all your loops look good. And we're ready for row number 3, which is now going to be the main body of your blanket. Rows number 3 and 4 is going to be your repeat, going over and over. So whenever you have row number 3, the first 2 stitches need to be purled and the last 2 stitches need to be purled. So if you just keep an eye on those 2 stitches, you don't have to worry about counting what's in the center. So in order to purl the first 2, the yarn has to be in front, and you are just going to push it backward into, okay, so push it back into there from going like this. So we do 1 and do the same height of the stitches that you're used to, and then do the second one. Okay. So once you have those first 2 done, you were going to use this yarn from behind now. So just leave it, it just naturally went there, but just leave it from behind. And now you're going to pull up through the back, coming forward all the way into the last 2. So with this yarn already in behind now, just start and just pull it up through the back, the same height of your stitches. A great tip that you may want to do is that once you place it into the loop like this, kind of pinch down on top of this loop here and this yarn here that is leading into this one, pinch down on it so that when you pull it, it's only going to pull from the yarn ball and not from the last loop that was pushed in. Okay, so that's a kind of a cool tip for you. And kind of just leave it like this. So these 2 will look backwards because that's what we want because of the first, and we're just going to knit our way across. So from the back. And just keep an eye on the ones right directly behind it to make sure that you don't accidentally pull those out. And so if you favor, when you pull through, just favor the one side of the loop. Okay, it'll naturally come from the ball itself. So here's the tip. So see how it kind of look like that? Make sure that when you push it down, it looks similar to what you had before. You can fix this later without having to take everything apart, but just kind of look at it and make sure that when you pull up, it looks similar to what you have. Okay, here, I can tell that there's an accidental twist there. And as I mentioned, we'll be able to fix that. These are the last 2 stitches. So the last 2 have to be purled. And in this case, we are just going to come on the front. So bring the yarn to the front and push it back into the last 2 stitches. So the last 2 stitches become purl. Okay, so they will look different from the stitches that you just did. If you were looking here and you see that there's kind of a weird thing going on, just make sure that when you pull up on it, it just looks consistent on there. Okay, and I'll show you another tip later on. So let's move on to row number 4. To prepare for row number 4, again, don't pick up your project, just leave it. Bring the yarn to the other side. So my ball is sitting over here, but I'm just getting the extra slack and I'm just pushing it over so I can bring it up. So row number 4, whenever you start row number 4, it's straight knitting all the way across. Okay, so you're just going to start with your first loop, bring this around the back side and just pull through. So it's only row number 3 that the first 2 get purled. So then you start pulling these through the back side. So straight knitting all the way across. So later on in this tutorial, I'm going to show you what happens when you run out of yarn midway through a row. It could be the end of the row too, but I'm going to show you midway because that chances are that may happen to you. And I'm also going to show you how to be able to go back through a project down a column in order to get that done. So in row number 4, the last 2 are just knit from behind, which gives it that look that you see on the edges. Okay, so it should not look the same as the rest of it. Okay, so let's begin row number 3 again. Let's start row number 3. The first 2 are purl. So bring the yarn in front first and just go into your first 2 loops, pushing the yarn back into this from the front. So do 1 and do the next one from the front. So you've already learned this. So now the rest of them are just knit. So now take the yarn to the back and start on your next one and just go up and through the back. So I'm going to intentionally turn the loop to show you what happens. So if I don't pull it up the same and I accidentally turn it around backwards, then what happens is that that stitch looks weird. Okay, see how it doesn't look the same? And you may not notice that right away. So I'm going to show you a tip to be able to fix that later before you get to, you can get quite far to be able to fix it, but I will show you. So I'm going to say I don't notice it. I'm going to continue to knit. This is row number 3. So all I'm doing is that I'm looking for the final 2 stitches. And then in the final 2 stitches that you'll have, put the yarn in front and push through to the back side. Okay. And that was row number 3 again. So I'll show you row number 4, and I'll also show you how to fix that. Row number 4, we're going to straight knit across. So with the yarn coming from the opposite side here, just take the yarn from behind and pull it through. So you're just going to do it from all the way across, and you're going to find, at least I am finding, I'm getting faster at it because there's more work here on the table so that it gets easier to be able to manipulate this stuff. And I'm not as worried about the loops falling out as I was. And that just comes with practice. So I'm going to keep knitting across from row number 4. And I'm going to be coming up to that mistake that I did with I have the twist that's coming up soon. And I'll show you a cool little trick. So if you make a mistake, so I say to myself, well, that doesn't look the same here because it isn't. So what you can do before you go any further, you can undo this whole pile if you wanted to, but you only want to undo the ones that are not making sense. So pull out, and you can go down as far as you need to go. Okay, so now you've just pulled out all of those loops. So you know that they're coming from the behind, so then you just look at it and pull them properly through. Okay, so you pull the first one back up, you do the next one, back up. And so if there was a weird twist to it, there's no longer a weird twist to it, and you can keep on going and make it look consistent. Okay, so that twist is gone. And then you can keep on knitting. So just look down your work. If you see any of the columns that are just not consistent with each other, then chances are there's a twist to it that is causing you some grief. And you can just undo it and keep on going. So this is row number 4. So we're going to knit ourselves right to the end of the row. And you're not going to worry about purling. And you go right to the end. And so you're going to start row number 3 again. So the first 2 are purled, the rest are knit, and then purl the last 2. So what I'm going to do in the next part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you what happens when you run out of yarn, because you are going to run out of yarn and it's not always on the end of the row. So you can do the same for the end of the row if you want to, but I'll do it in the middle just for argument's sake, so that you know what to do. So I'm going to intentionally cut my yarn and say that I'm running out, and we'll be doing that next. So now that you know how to knit and purl with this, I'm going to say, well, oops, I'm running out of yarn. So you don't have to run out of yarn on the end. You can run out anywhere on this thing. So don't waste any of this yarn. And so I'm going to start row number 3, and row number 3, I'm doing the purl. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a row 3 or 4 to change out your yarn. It can be any of the rows. And I'm going to go until I have a decent amount left on this one here. So then I'm going to knit a few more, and I would want to leave enough of the tail so that I can use that tapestry needle with the same looking color yarn to be able to secure in the ends. Okay, this is enough. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to grab the new yarn ball, okay, and I'm just going to create a loop roughly about the same distance. And don't put a slip knot or anything, and start with your very next loop and pull through. So now you're using the new yarn towards the new ball. If you have a knot in your ball, this is also a way to be able to cut it out and also start fresh so that you don't end up with a knot on the center. Remember, when they make yarn, yarn is not endless. It goes from industrial spool to industrial spool, and chances are the knot is when it jumped from spool to spool. And so if any of these loops do come out, just like I showed you that you can undo, you can do that again. So we're now going to move on to row number 4 again, and I'm just going to leave these out of the way, and I'm going to do row number 4 with you before securing that. Row number 4, straight knitting. So just take the yarn in front and go in behind and pull through. So you're not going to worry about the loops that are jumping from when the ball is stopped. Okay, you're just going to pretend you don't know about it and just keep on knitting your way across. And we keep on going across. And so by doing this, we're making it consistent on the spacing, because there's kind of a break, right? So just jumping over. And so because this is straight knitting across, we're just going to knit right to the end. And now we're going to deal with those tail ends. Okay. So it looks pretty consistent. So what I want to do is just fold it back like this, and we're going to deal with these 2 strands individually on their own, and we will do that next. The first thing that we want to do is grab a similar color towards what you're using and just use 1 strand at a time. When you pull on this stuff, do not pull out any loops. And what you're going to do is that you're going to create a slip knot with the one side with a little bit of a tail, and when you put the slip knot on, you're going to go onto this strand here. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to pull it tight to the strand. So it's going to be this strand here that's going to hold this from falling out. Take the other side and put it through a tapestry needle. Now we want to secure this in. This is the back side of your project, so it's the side to favor. And so you will notice that this yarn has what is called as a core. So if you go into the really center, see how it's kind of split a bit? That's the core. And when we go to secure this in, we want to secure it into the core of the strands. And you'll be able to, if you go in and pull up and it pulls right out, that means that you're not in the core. Okay, and you were just going to pull through this. Just use your fingers to be able to keep this from going rogue on you. And when you pull through like this, you're going to be pulling through that loose end through. Okay, so I just pulled it through. So if it's too easy to fall out, then it will become your personal nightmare. So we just pulled it through. So now we're going to go through somewhere else here. So maybe put your fingers in behind, feel for the cores. So don't allow your needle to go to the good side. Stay on the back and then pull through again. And you're essentially pulling that through. And then do it one more time. So somewhere slightly different, again, staying on the back. Again, making sure I'm not pulling out any loops here. Okay, so now what I want to do is that I want to secure this with a tie to the back side. So just going into there and just cause it to tie into a little bit of a knot. Okay, and then do it again. And luckily for you, you only have 4 balls to work with, so it's not that big a deal. Now, right where this is holding onto the yarn, just go a little bit beyond it. So the knot, I can feel it. It's right where my thumb is. So I'm going to go a little higher of it and trim that. Okay. This is the loose end from that strand, so I'm not going to worry about that yet. And what I'm going to do then finally, because we do have a knot in the backside, we're just going to pull through and kind of secure everything into position. So we're going to do that with all of the loose ends that you have. Okay, and if you don't like the tail end, just go right up over it and hold it into position. You just got to practice with it a little bit. And then once you're satisfied with it, which is pretty flat to the project now, I'm going to tie this into a knot again, making sure that you are going into the yarn itself. And one last knot. So if you try to use a crochet hook or whatever to weave in your ends, you're going to have a nightmare on your hands because it will come out on you. So this is holding it in, and it also is preventing the yarn from fraying to be able to come out on you. So that's done, but then you still have the tail ends of that same one. So push that, if it's on the front side, just push it to the back here. Put that onto the tapestry needle, and all you're going to do with this yarn is just hide it in. You think about just securing these tails, you probably could have did another 5 rows. But this is a great way to do it. And as I mentioned, you only have 4 balls. So you want to go back and forth 3 times in your project and then safely cut that down. And because it's the same color, you don't even see it. So you would want to do that with the other tail that you'll have, just the same way. And then you keep on doing your rows as you know it. So let's go through the instructions. So we did rows number 3 and 4 the first time, and the pattern says just to repeat rows number 3 and 4 8 times total. So it's a total of 16 rows. So you will be able to count the number of rows literally on the blanket as well, or if you were taking your notes, you can do that. So you can get a check sheet and just do that if you want to. You're then going to have 16 rows of color B, which is that burgundy color or the orchid color that you see within the pattern. So then you have the same amount of rows that will do that. And then you're going to change your color back to A, which is this gray, or the gray that's recommended, dark gray. And you're gonna do essentially 10 rows of going back and forth. So what happens if you have to change the yarn on the end? So let's just say I need to change the yarn over and I need to finish it, and you have to trim your yarn, and you will have to deal with the tail end just the way I showed you. So you'll grab your next color. In my case, I don't have any other yarn in stock here. So I will just grab the new color up and just do exactly how I did it, as if I was joining in the middle. Okay, so you start off on the edge. And so because this is row number 3 that I'm going into, and I can tell because I'm going this way, then put your yarn in front, leaving a bit of a tail, and you'll deal with that tail exactly the same way that you would have dealt with the changing the yarn in the middle of the row. Okay, so you will secure it to the ends. So both of these you'll have to do. And then because this is row number 3, you're going to knit all the way across. So I'm just going to continue to knit a bit, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you how to finish off. So you see how this looks different from, like this area looks different than this. We need to do some work to get this side to look consistent to this side, because if we just bind off now, we're going to be binding off and it's just straight knitting going up and down. So I will show you the next rows after you've done the repeat rows. So you would have done your 16 rows of this color, 16 of the other, and then 10 rows of this color once again, and then you're ready for the next part of this tutorial. And I will be right back in a moment. So once you have all your repeating done, you're ready to go, and your final 2 rows are ready to go to make it look like the beginning. We are then going to start with the next row in the pattern, it says, and we want to bring the yarn from the front, and we just want to purl our way all the way across. So we're not going to worry about knitting at this point, so we just go all the way from the front and just push it back into the loops. So we're going to purl all the way across to give it the look of how we started. So in knitting, they call it either a cast off or a bind off. And then in crochet, we call it a fasten off at the very end. So there's a difference of the terminology. So we've just now purled our way all the way across, and we're ready for the next row. And that's coming up next. So you can see that it's starting to look consistent to the beginning. And so for the next row, we are just going to go across, and we are going to purl into each one of the stitches right all the way across. Okay, so we just come up like this, and we purl once again. So you just want to release more yarn off your ball if you need it. And again, it's just easier if you just put it in the front. And so you're going to purl your way all the way across. So you're going to have all these live loops that are still there on your final bind off. Okay, and now we're ready for your final row, which is next. So we're going to bind off in knit format. So we want to take the yarn and put it to the back side. And we are going to start with the very last one and pull up through like this. And then we're going to knit your next one in a row. And before you get that done, you need to put this loop on top of this loop. So make sure that it's a little bit generous so it's not too tight, and put this over top, and that loop is no longer live and is now closed. Okay, so we knit the next one. We take this one here and we place it over top. Make sure you're consistent with how it looks. So always, if you're going to go this way, then always do that way. If you're going to go down, then always do it that way. So make sure that it's consistent. You'll be thanking yourself later. And so now you've just closed off another stitch. Okay, so just come through the back, knit the next one. And you're not going to be able to pull any slack, so you got to make sure you get your slack right here. And if you think it's too tight, then you can safely just kind of pull things out and retry. Okay, so you can see that we're closing off the edge, and you can see there's not a lot of give to it. So you see on the top of the bottom of the blanket, it's kind of coming in a little bit. That's because of that. So if you think it's not great, then just pull the yarn out and try again. And maybe do a little bit more slack and see what happens. So you keep knitting the next one in a row, and then you could put the last live one over top across. Okay, so we're going to come to our last one next. So we come right into that last one, and then we put this one over top, and then you're left with this last live. So what you need to do is trim your yarn just long enough that you can do that technique I showed you of weaving in your tails, and just push this loop, this yarn through the loop, and that will prevent it from coming out. Give it a bit of a tug. Use your tapestry needle and your yarn to be able to do that, and you can see that you would have a really cool blanket. Let me zoom you out. Okay, so you have your upper border, upper border, lower border, you have your sides, and it's all really consistent looking, even on the back side. And this would be finger knitting with Bernat Blanket Extra. We hope that you've enjoyed, and please leave me your comments below. We'll see you.